What's up, everyone? Good afternoon. Holy smokes, Mercy, is it your birthday? What? Happy birthday. Happens every year, and here it is today. Welcome to the next year of your life, Mercy Morgan, and everyone else, welcome to The Altar. I am your host, Colby Martin, as you see on the screen here. That's me. And I can't wait to be with you for the next few minutes today. I'm going to end a little early this afternoon. Oftentimes, I'll go for like a good hour or so, but today I'm going to go for about 40 minutes because I got to get to one of my kids' back to school orientations. I don't want to miss it. So anyway, so that means I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to get right to it. So glad you're here with me today on The Altar. Let's get into it. To answer your question, Fred Freeman, I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. It's actually been an exciting morning here in the Martin house. Why, you ask? Well, because here, let me tell you this. I have long been an aficionado of the world of audio and video. I know that probably comes as a shock to you, but I love setting up my home theater. I've always loved dialing in the surround sound. Since as long as I can remember, I have had a surround sound system for watching movies and TV. In fact, one of my first purchases out of college was a home theater in a box from Onkyo. Came with a receiver and the 5.1 surround sound. Got by with that for a number of years. Finally upgraded to something other than just the home theater in a box, so like an independent receiver. And then I started building out my own speakers. And it's just over the years slowly been upgrading, new bookshelves, new center channel, new surround on the wall, definitely new subwoofer along the way, because you never can underestimate the power of a good subwoofer, or the impact of a good subwoofer. And then today, for the first time, I'm excited to tell you, today I finally made the move from bookshelf speakers that sat like on our media center, like as left and right channel. I know this is really fascinating. I'm sure this is why you tuned in today. I finally upgraded from bookshelf speakers, which are, about yay high, yay wide and then deep. So I've had these bookshelf speakers from ELAC for, I'm going to say 4 years now. Before that, I had a different set for about 6 years. I finally upgraded today and got floor standing speakers. And I'm very excited about it. The ones that are, this tall off the ground, and they sit on either side of the TV. And I'm very excited. So I went and picked those up today. Bought them used from a guy here in San Diego off of OfferUp. Got a smoking deal on them. And I can't wait to dial those in and play with that tonight and later on for the rest of the week. So anyway, to answer your question, Fred, I'm doing good because today I fulfilled the next stage in my dream of superior audiovisual experience. Okay. All right. Anyway, so that's me. That's how I'm doing. Shane knows what I'm talking about. He says, I remember the first time I realized that you could set up surround sound and have independent speakers instead of just the little tiny speakers in the TV. Yes, I was in love. Same with me, Shane. Same here. Well, hey, if this is your first time here on The Altar, I want to say a special welcome to you. Thanks for joining me live, if that's how you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. If you are on YouTube and you want to hit subscribe, go ahead and do that. And if you are on Facebook and you want to like my page, also go ahead and do that. And also, you don't have to. It doesn't matter. What was I going to say? Oh, and if you're watching this back later, after the fact, and you're not live, then don't forget, you can always join us live Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific right here on my YouTube channel and Facebook page. So what I want to do today, and this is how I often start on The Altar, is I start with this morning's perspective shift. What is that, you ask? Well, perspective shift is a weekly newsletter that I write and send out to everybody who's subscribed, and it just automatically gets sent into your inbox on Wednesday mornings. And then I will come on here in the afternoons and I'll do a reading of it and talk with you about it if you want. Feel free to ask questions or engage, respond if you would like. Who else we got here? Troy. What's up, Troy? So glad to have you here. And then Haley May made it back. Whoop, whoop. And Ben doing some cross viewership love to Troy. This is fantastic. It's great having you all here. And James, hey James, also shouting out to Mercy for the happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mercy. So glad you're here. Hope this next year of your life is one of the top 3 for your entire life. All right, let's get into it though. This is today's perspective shift. And down here at the bottom, you can see like where you want to go if you want to read this article or subscribe to Perspective Shift to get all these articles delivered directly into your inbox on Wednesday mornings. Today, I want to talk a bit about, was Jesus actually a good teacher? Was Jesus actually a good teacher? So back to school's in full swing. Like I mentioned a minute ago, I'm going to bail out of my show here a little bit earlier than normal because I got some orientations to attend. But with, the whole back to school thing in full swing, I guess we're not really back. Kind of back. Full swing. I don't know if it really counts as full swing or not. But here we are. Nonetheless, those of us who have kids still in school are trying to stumble our way towards resuming some version of education again. And it's got me thinking about my high school days. Because I have 2 kids now that are in high school. One that's a junior, kid gravy. Another one that's a sophomore. And then I've got, 6th grade and 4th grade. And specifically, I've been thinking lately about my teachers as I've been talking with our kids about their different teachers and what their first impressions are. And I imagine that most of us are familiar with the phenomenon where, there are some teachers that you're really drawn to, you really like. And then there's other teachers that you tolerate, you put up with. You might even avoid, like when you're in high school and you can pick different classes and electives, you're like, all right, that is a teacher. I am not gonna take their class. And who knows what causes this? It could be their teaching style. It could just be personality. It could be some other quantum physics phenomenon. I don't know. But when I talk about, the teachers in high school that you really liked, I imagine a few come to mind for you. Like for me, I think of Mr. Lehman and Mr. O'Malley, who, BT Dubs, just passed away a couple months ago. Rest in peace, Mike. And then you also had the teachers that you just had to endure. The ones you just did not click with. Looking at you, Mr. Rogers in algebra, and you, Mrs. Krakauer in English lit. And so, good teachers, thinking of this idea of being a good teacher or not. So the ones that we like, we might call good. The ones we don't, we might not call good. But I've been thinking a lot about, for years now, what it means to talk about Jesus as a, quote, good teacher. What do we mean by this? Most people, whether they're spiritual or secular, or religious or not, they take for granted that when it comes to some of the great spiritual teachers throughout history, Jesus is on the short list. Like Jesus, even your sort of average kind of anti-Christian humanitarian secular person will acknowledge, yeah, Jesus was a great teacher. Like that, at least we can say that much about him. But when's the last time that you actually examined that claim? When's the last time you maybe sat with that statement longer than just an initial, of course she was a good teacher? So I was thinking about this and I'm like, I think we would say that a teacher is only good or maybe not good insofar as it relates to what the objective of the student is. In other words, one can only adequately judge the efficacy of a teacher, if they're good or not, when you assess it in light of what the goal happens to be in the context. What are they trying to teach? What is it they're trying to help the students understand? So consider example, the SATs. The goal of an SAT is pretty simple. Like you want to circle the right answer. You want to fill in the correct bubble. So then a good teacher, we would reasonably say a good teacher to prepare students for SATs is one that is dependent upon how well do they prepare their students to learn and then be able to recall the correct data to ensure that they have the right answer. So a good teacher when it comes to something like an SAT is like, here's all the data that you need to know so that you have the right answer when it comes time for the questions. And then on the other hand, you can imagine other contexts of student-teacher dynamics. And maybe the student's goal is to, make a robot. that can perform menial tasks, or bake a proper souffle, or publish a compelling novel. In situations and contexts like this, just memorizing information for the sake of data recall is insufficient, clearly. So in these cases, a good teacher, you might say, is one that does things like shows the students how they themselves would do it if they were making the robot, or challenge the students to think through what are the resources that you have at your disposal. How can you solve problems with your own unique ingenuity and skill set and research? Or maybe a good teacher might foster within that student a sense of confidence and grit, so that, like, come what may, you can overcome any obstacle and reach your goal. So we might have a different way to talk about a good teacher depending on what the context is. So it seems to me then that a good teacher, you might say, is one who both understands what the end objective actually is. What are we trying to get our students to do, to be, to know? And then secondly, a good teacher leverages the proper techniques to reach that goal, to help move the students toward it. So then if we want to call Jesus a good teacher, what are the metrics by which we are making that assessment? Like some of you, I grew up in a religious framework that was organized around this idea, presented in such a way that said that the point of life is to believe the right things, so that when you die, you get to spend eternity in heaven. Woo-woo. So life, in other words, is just like one long SAT prep course. Like you spend your 70 some odd years making sure that you will pass the test correctly. Your ticket into heaven, under this premise, everything hinged on possessing the proper pieces of theological data. If you pass the test, you get clouds and singing and streets of gold, which I guess is supposed to be motivating and supposed to be awesome. But if you fail the test, you get fire and demons and darkness, which I guess obviously is way worse than clouds and singing. Now, for the record, as you probably know by now, if you've hung out with me at all, I wholeheartedly reject this premise. But if for the moment we grant that it is true, like my parents and pastors and professors all assured me that it was, if this really is like how life works and how the afterlife works, then I think Jesus could only be considered a good teacher if he adequately prepared us to get the ultimate answers correct. In other words, his one job should have been get earthlings to believe the right thing so that they know what to say when St. Peter quizzes them at the pearly gate. That should be, if the point is to believe the right things so that when we die, we get to spend eternity in heaven with God, then if Jesus was good at all, I would argue both morally and just like good at his job, then he should have ensured that people would know what to believe, what the right answer is. And yet, and perhaps you know where I'm going here, that's not how Jesus taught. It's actually not how, when we read the Gospels, we do not see an individual who was primarily concerned with getting people to believe the right things, nor do we see an individual who was just teaching a data acquisition so that you might retain the proper theological beliefs. It's not there. That idea of a good teacher in that sense is entirely absent from the Gospels. Jesus taught in two ways, as I see it. First, he taught through his actions, which sort of modeled how one ought to live and what matters most in life. And then two, he taught verbally through his teachings using more often than not a form that we call parables. Parables. And that's what I want to dig into here with you in a minute. I'll pause to see if anybody's got any thoughts so far. Ben says, I'm having deja vu. Is this in your book or a Sojourn Grace message, or both, Ben? This is a topic that I return to often as I spend not a small amount of energy helping us to rethink and reframe what is important in life and to cast a different vision for that. Maybe the point of life is not to just believe the right things. And maybe Jesus was up to something different. Because if the point is to believe the right things, then we should expect a particular type of behavior and teaching from Jesus. And we don't see that. So I think that's one of the reasons why we can question that. So anyway, I've talked about it at Sojourn before, and it is in my chapter on Jesus and the shift, which is available now. Link below in the description. Tommy, hey, what's up, Tommy? Glad you're here. Tommy says, I'm so glad I didn't grow up in church. I developed a sense of morality apart from the church before I was infected with so much of what Christianity has become. You know what? Cheers to that. I know others like you, Tommy, who have a similar attitude of gratitude for being able to maybe come to some of these truths or come to some of these ideas later on in life, maybe in young adulthood or later on in adulthood. And they're able to do so without maybe having to tear down or break apart from some of the old constructs. So that's cool. Thanks for sharing. And yes, then Tommy says, my favorite passage is John 14, one God, God is love. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so then let's talk about parables for just a second here. I love parables, BT dubs. I did a whole small group virtually shortly after the world shut down last year. I took a group of folks through John Dominic Crossan's book on parables and just had a delightful time talking about parables. I think it's a wonderful... Parables are so simple and so deep, and I just love to explore them. Yeah, Corey's like, lucky bastard to Tommy for the whole not growing up in church. That's fair. All right, so parables, you can think of them like this. Parables are like these short stories or these compact ideas that use metaphor to invite the listener into a deeper reality. For Jesus, teaching via parables, it wasn't just this nifty pedagogical preference. It wasn't just like a handy and clever device for passing on wisdom. I think there was actually more going on as to why Jesus taught in parables. I think using parables to communicate, as he often did, different characteristics of the kingdom of God, I think by doing that, he indicated like what it actually means to engage with and experience the kingdom of God. We'll talk about that in a second. And if the term kingdom of God trips you up, just think of it like this. Kingdom of God is like the space, the posture, the experience of what it's like to live in harmony with the divine. It's like being locked into the flow of God. It is to essentially say the things that are the most true, the most real, the most good, aka God, are the things that are my life's aim and the things that I'm most grounded in. So being in all of that and for that and with that is to sort of experience and be within the kingdom of God. And I think Jesus teaching parables, by doing that, it actually spoke to what the kingdom of God is all about. So Marshall McLuhan, if you're not familiar with that name, he's the father, one of the fathers of communications and media studies. One of his most well-known sayings that has stuck for decades now is the phrase, the medium is the message, which basically is a way to say the way in which you communicate something, the medium of how you communicate something, oftentimes says just as much as what you're actually saying about it. So the medium, how you communicate, is the message. How you communicate is communicating even more so than the content. So what could that mean then when we consider that Jesus used the medium of parables to describe, what the message of chasing after this abundant, flourishing life? What is the message of the medium of a parable? For starters, I would submit to you that parables, while they're designed to be simple, can be memorized and recited pretty easily, they're hardly clear. Parables are simple, sure, but they're hardly clear. Parables often use like a tangible physical world all around. Like the elements of the parable are right in front of you, but they're used in a way to bring to mind deeper truths about reality and about what it means to be alive. Things that we might maybe deep inside know to be true, but maybe we've forgotten or we've chosen to ignore it. Parables are often used to provoke and to challenge the listener. And so it requires effort to engage them. Rarely do you just hear a parable and be like, oh, I got it. I'm good. Moving on. Figure that one out. No, it's like it pokes and it prods and it challenges you and it forces you to like wrestle with it. And it has stories that confront us and ideas that wake us up, and it rattles our assumptions. These are all the things that parables do. And so by using parables, I think Jesus is saying that the kingdom of God, or life lived in harmony within the reality of the divine, this cannot easily be defined. It's not a paint by numbers sort of thing. It requires practice and tension and paradox. It requires working it out. It requires getting it wrong even, maybe even a lot, before we ever start finding our groove. By contrast, if life is just about getting the answers right, then I'd say teaching in parables is probably a bad idea. Probably the wrong move. No offense, Jesus, but not smart to use parables if the point here is to get the answers right. So when you think about the medium being the message, one of the messages of the medium of the parable, one of the messages is that experiencing God, maybe you might think of it like this. It's less like baking. For baking, you have to have real tight precision and ratios of ingredients. And if you don't have everything sort of, lined up proportionately correctly, then you're going to have destruction of your thing you're trying to bake. The crust isn't going to rise. The cake will be dry and crumbly. But maybe experiencing God is more like cooking, where you have sort of the basic ingredients, the spices and the vegetables and the proteins, and you have the fundamental elements, but there's like room to play and to imagine and to adapt and to figure out as you go. And it's okay to adjust on the fly, and the ratios don't have to be perfect, and it can be different depending on who's enjoying the meal. And I think in one sense, it's fair to say this might disappoint us. That's fair. We've become accustomed to life in this modern world, this technologically satisfying world. We have so much access to information, and we have instant gratification on our fingertips. And on one hand, yes, there's something to be said. There's a lot to be grateful for this, for our access to information and answers quickly and instantly. Getting the right answers and being able to execute tasks is really nice. And we've kind of become used to that. For instance, we don't have to learn how to code computers. We can just go to Squarespace and have a beautiful website like within minutes. We don't have to learn how to make sushi. We can open up our phone and order from Grubhub and have fresh, sushi at our door in 20 minutes. Well, fresh if you live like in San Diego. Sorry, if you're in Oklahoma, I can't really speak to the freshness of tuna out there. But I think the kingdom of God is not like that. It's not like this sort of just paint by numbers, get everything lined up sequentially, static reality. It's not about getting it right. I think instead it's about showing up. It's about listening. It's about loving. It's about learning. It's about growing. These are the markers, I think, of what it means to experience and be a part of the kingdom of God. So unlike Alexa, parables don't just give you the right answer. They don't just tell you how to live. Rather, they invite you to work it out in your own way and in your own context. And for me, I find that really liberating. I really do. So if the medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan says, then what message did Jesus convey by using parables to teach about and describe his experience with God? Maybe it's this. Maybe life with God is wild and dynamic and free, not controlled or static and predictable. Maybe experiencing the divine is meant to be learned and discovered, not figured out and dissected. Got that one nailed. Moving on. Maybe seeking an abundant, wholehearted life of flourishing should be something that liberates us as it creates these new possibilities in the world, not constrict or confine us because we're limited to these set of timeless truths that people already figured out 2,000 years ago. And now our job is to just like study that and memorize it and hopefully pass the test when we die. So in the end, if you ask me, yeah, I think Jesus was a good teacher. I think he deserves the moniker of good teacher, because I think he wanted to teach us how to fish, how to figure it out for ourselves, not just give us this magical mahi-mahi taco filled with an eternal golden ticket. So those are my thoughts today. Those are my thoughts today as I'm thinking about back to school and Jesus as a good teacher and what it means to experience God within the kingdom of God. I'd love to know what you think. You can either share here in the comment section or you can go to the article and leave a comment on the Substack page there. But have you ever thought about what it means that Jesus was a good teacher? Have you thought of this? Have you said it? If so, what has that meant to you in the past? How have you approached parables? What have they meant to you before? And I don't know, when I talk about life being something other than just this test to get the answer right, does that freak you out? Or does that sound kind of light and freeing? Like, how does that land with you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, Tommy, I got the golden ticket. Yeah, that's right. I love that. Hi, Susanna Q. Berlinski. Do people send money to you? No, not yet, but they're sure welcome to. I don't know if you're offering or if you're just inquiring, but no, this show is entirely free. I do have, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/Kate and Colby. And my wife and I have a podcast. In fact, tonight we've got a guest coming, Shelby Forsythia, who's a specialist on grief. And so the Kate and Colby show, we invite people to support us by going to Buy Me a Coffee. That's all one word, buymeacoffee.com/Kate and Colby, KATEANDCOLBY. And people can support the show there. But this particular show here, no, I don't, people don't send money to me. Yes, Mercy's with me. Wild, dynamic, and free. Doesn't that sound like something of God? Doesn't that sound like the Jesus that was so captivating and riveting that people like left everything to follow him? I don't know that people would have just left everything to follow a stodgy old like theological professor. Oh no, I would like to teach you. I don't know why I changed to that voice, but anyway. I like this, John. John says, I think the goal is wisdom. I think that's a great perspective. Oh, Susanna says yes. All right. Well, then, Susanna, I'll tell you what. I just mentioned that. I'll throw it on the screen here. buymeacoffee.com/Kate and Colby. There you go. If you want. Now, it's really tiny. I'll leave that on the screen for just a second here. If you want to buy me a coffee or multiple coffees. All that money, by the way, goes to support all of the online ministry and content that my wife and I do, whether it's through here or through the Kate and Colby show. Don't tempt me, Corey. Don't tempt me. Golden sparkly jacket. If I had a golden sparkly jacket, I would wear it. Maybe not right now because it's really hot here in San Diego. But I would wear a golden sparkly jacket. I feel like my closet is missing that. That's great. Oh, Corey also says teaching in parables not so much about right or wrong thinking. That makes so much sense to me, right? I love it. Mercy says, I really appreciate your consistent message. Right, Ben? Like books and teaching and writings and online shows. And it just can't be about correct beliefs. There's got to be more to it than that. There's got to be more to it than that. Love it. I like this, Shane. In terms of a leader by example, yeah, if you think of a good teacher in that way, someone who leads by example, I think that also would adequately qualify Jesus to be good. Tommy says, never seen my wife before. I haven't put her on screen yet. I don't know if you're talking about the graphic I had a minute ago. That was our guest for tonight, but maybe you went and looked somewhere else and then saw my wife. Then yes, She is very beautiful. Stunning both inside and out. James says I would rock a golden sparkly jacket. That's awesome. Thanks, buddy. All right. I'm going to now go to a section called Ask Me Anything. Should have swallowed that water first. Ask me a question. This is a brand new segment here at the altar. And by the way, if you have a question, you can go to colbymartin.live/question. And you can do it anonymously, or you can give me your name and I can put the name on the screen. Doesn't really, either way is fine with me. But today's question is this, and I want to thank the viewer/reader who sent this in. Today's question is this: why do we take some books of the Bible seriously when its authorship is in question, such as the book of Hebrews? We don't know who wrote it. We don't know why they wrote it, what their intentions were. How do we view those in the same way, like being inspired as other books where we might have more confidence of the authorship? So I would, great question, by the way. I would say this about, in general, about authorship of the Bible is, if you grew up in sort of a Western Protestant, maybe, like an evangelical or even a mainline tradition, the odds are pretty high that you were given information that led you to believe that we have a high degree of confidence about the authorship of all the books in the Bible, and especially the New Testament. For instance, the Gospel of Matthew, you might have been told, is written by Matthew. Mark, written by Mark. Luke, written by Luke. John, written by John, and so on. Many of the Pauline epistles, many of us were just taught and told and assumed that they're all written by Paul. Here's the thing, though, is we actually have some pretty good scholarship within the last several decades that gives us really good reasons to maybe not see that it's as simple as that, as whoever's name is at the top of the book is the one who wrote it. So for me, I think this question is great, but it kind of goes beyond. It's not like there are some books that are clearly written by, we know the author, and some not. Even though the submitter of the question here is correct. Hebrews, I think, is one of the universally agreed upon books in the New Testament where, like, nobody has any idea who wrote Hebrews. It's all guesses. But even within that, you have some of the, like I said, Pauline letters where Paul probably wrote maybe 5 or 6 letters to the Corinthian church, and we only have 2. These 2 letters to Timothy, chances are one or both of those weren't actually written by Paul. They were written by someone after Paul, sort of in the voice of Paul. Matthew almost certainly didn't write Matthew. John, hang tight now, John probably didn't write John either, or 1, 2, and 3 John, or Revelation. Rather, these were probably written by communities that were sort of oriented around the apostleship, the leadership of John. And so they wrote in his voicing and in his name. So anyway, I think the question is a larger question of what do we do in general when we don't know who wrote a book of the Bible and why. And I think that we need to, not need, you can do what you want. I try to practice in general being like, I don't know that I would place a book of the Bible higher if I know for certain the author than I would another one if it was maybe born out of a community of people. I'm not sure that this means that one is more or less inspired than the other. It's very possible, and this is especially true with the Old Testament. The Old Testament most likely was compiled by, like, you think of Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy. This is called the document hypothesis theory, where more than likely you had like 4 different versions of these books that had been curated and edited over centuries and then compiled together so that when you read, like, for instance, Genesis, it's not just one version of Genesis, it's 4 versions of Genesis that have all been sort of put together to try to tell one sort of cohesive narrative. So my point is when we want to talk about the inspiration of the Bible, when we want to ask, what is the Bible? What does it mean to us? What sort of role does it have in my life, if any, for things such as authority? Maybe we can take the authorship question not off the table, because I still think it's interesting, but it doesn't mean that, in my opinion, that the ones that we know the author are somehow more reliable or more, quote, divinely inspired than the ones not. I think, for instance, the book of Hebrews has gorgeous depth of wisdom and insight and truth. And just because we don't know who wrote it or what the intentions were, can we still take it for what it is, and what can we get out of that? Same thing with like the 3 letters of John. Almost certainly weren't written by John, but were written by communities formed by John, like long after he had died. And so they wrote in the sort of the spirit of John, you might say. And that can have just as much power and truth and goodness as if it was written by a single individual whose name was actually John. So anyway, that's my quick thought on authorship, and the Bible. There's clearly a lot more to get into there, but thanks for the question. If you have a question, you can submit it to colbymartin.live/question, and who knows, maybe it'll show up on the altar someday. Speaking of questions, Susanna says, all questions of substance will be ignored here. I don't know what you're referring to, Susanna. I try not to ignore questions of substance, but I also don't entertain every question. So hopefully, I assume you can appreciate that I can use some discretion to entertain some and respond to some questions, and others maybe are so far off topic or so far outside of my lane of expertise or insight. Like, why? Please don't ask me about stem cell research, anybody, because I have nothing to say about it. I don't know. But I don't know that I would say all questions of substance are ignored here. But maybe you have more context for that. Oh, that's a great book. So John Jacobson over on Facebook dropped a link to how the Bible actually works, in which I explain how an ancient, ambiguous, and diverse book leads us to wisdom rather than answers. That's a really good book. So thanks for that link to that, John. All right, before I get going here, I want to do an altar call with you. Here we go. As you know, my show is called The Altar. That's altar with an E, and it is a bit of a play on words because in the religious world, an altar with an A is a place where you would bring a sacrifice to make good with the gods. And here at The Altar with an E, part of our the point here of the show is to sacrifice bad beliefs that need to be laid down for the sake of transformation and growth. And so the altar call, altar with an A, in my evangelical world was all about raising your hand and like saying, I accept some prayer of salvation and now I have the answer right. But here at the altar with an E, the altar call is, here's something to consider changing your mind about. Here's an idea that might be worth reconsidering. And today I want to talk a little bit about the difference between when our people, and this might be religious or political, when our people are wrong, when we are wrong about something, we just say, well, we were wrong about it. We just made a mistake. We didn't have the right information, or our instincts were, whatever it was, were wrong. But then when others are wrong, others get it wrong, when something happens to the other team, the other side, then we want to say, well, there's some nefarious thing going on. There must be a conspiracy. And I just want to sit with that for just a minute. And part of what comes up for me in that is what's called the fundamental attribution error. Are you familiar with this? The fundamental attribution error. It's a cognitive, one of those sneaky cognitive biases. And the fundamental attribution error is this, where when someone else does a thing, we overemphasize things like personality and character. But then when we do the same thing, we overemphasize personality. So here's what that means. Here's a quick example, and you can see a guy there driving in the rearview mirror. So you're on the road, and someone cuts you off, like on the freeway, to make an exit really quick, like, as it happens here in Southern California on a daily. And oftentimes your instinct is to be like, that guy's a real jerk. God, what an a-hole. He has no consideration for anybody else. He's a terrible person, terrible driver. So we're overemphasizing their character based on an action that we see. But then, y'all, inevitably, I'm sure you're not perfect, and you have at times cut people off on the freeway. Maybe not even realizing it. Have you ever made a lane change and then been like, oh, good gravy. I did not, there in my blind spot, I did not see, I feel awful. And we only have one horn on the car. We have the aggressive horn. We don't have the, sorry. So when we do the same thing, we attribute it to context. Oh, total mistake. I'm not a jerk. I don't cut people off. That was an accident. Or some other external context, like, the classic, my wife's in labor, so I gotta get to the hospital, or I'm gonna be late to a meeting. I was like, I promise I don't do this all the time. This is a one-off event, so sorry. When someone else does it, we attribute it to their character. It's a character flaw. When we do it, we chalk it up to context. Now, I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs of what's going on in Afghanistan right now, because that fits squarely within things that I don't know enough about. But when I was thinking about this politically and the fundamental attribution there, I was thinking, like, when our political party gets a thing wrong, or when we learn about something. So I'm thinking about the way the CDC is constantly just sort of like, well, here's the new policies for COVID. I don't know. In the beginning, it doesn't seem like masks make a difference. Towards the middle, actually, masks really seem to help. And then recently, if you're vaccinated, don't worry about a mask. And now it's like, actually, because of the Delta, we should have like when it's on our team, when it's our political people, we're like, hey, we're learning as we go. We might get some things wrong, but we're trying. But then when it's the other side viewing it, it's like, no, there's ill intent going on. There's a conspiracy. What is it? What are they hiding from us? Who's pulling the strings here? And I just think that we can fall into this trap. We can fall into this trap of thinking that when other people get something wrong, it's because, or do something that we see as wrong, it's because they themselves are, like I said, a jerk, or they have some nefarious intent, or have some questionable character. But if it's us, well, there's a context, there's a reason, it's an outlier. There's this thing that caused it, or I just was wrong. It was an accident. So my call today is this. What's the call? The call today is this. Be slow to accuse others of nefarious motivations or dubious character. Maybe they're just wrong. Maybe they just got something wrong accidentally or completely innocently. They just got it wrong. Doesn't mean they're a bad person. Doesn't mean it's a conspiracy. Maybe it doesn't mean anything more than they just got it wrong this time. All right. Well, that's it for me today on the altar. I'm so glad. I'm going to head off now really quickly to go to my child's orientation. I really appreciate you all being with me. I'm here live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. On YouTube and on Facebook. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you hopefully 7 days from now. Be well, everybody.